In the heart of the Amazon, a billionaire magnate is captured by the community he planned to evict. Between painful revelations and an unexpected transformation, he watches his empire and life crumble. Desperate, he declares, "My fortune is yours, if you save me," placing everything in the only person he trusts. Now she races against time to protect him, face powerful enemies, and save a dream that could change the world. Richard Montgomery's helicopter cut through the clear Montana sky, casting a moving shadow across the pristine wilderness below. The powerful chopper descended toward a small clearing near Eagle Creek, a secluded community nestled between towering mountains and a crystal-clear river that had flowed undisturbed for centuries. At 58, Montgomery was at the pinnacle of his career. CEO of Montgomery Luxury Resorts, a billion-dollar hospitality empire that stretched across 3 continents. Today marked the beginning of his most ambitious project yet. "We're approaching the landing zone, Mr. Montgomery," the pilot announced through the headset. Richard nodded and turned to Jessica Parker, his executive assistant. At 32, Jessica was everything a corporate titan could want in a right hand. Harvard MBA, ruthlessly efficient, and completely devoted to her boss's vision of success. Her slim figure was always impeccably dressed in designer business attire, her auburn hair perfectly styled in a professional bob, and her green eyes missed nothing. "Jess, make sure those locals understand we're not here to negotiate. This meeting is a courtesy, nothing more." The Eagle Crest Resort project moves forward regardless of their quaint objections. Jessica nodded as she tapped notes into her tablet. "Of course, Mr. Montgomery. I've prepared all the documentation showing the economic benefits they'll receive. Jobs, infrastructure improvements, increased tourism revenue. The rational ones will understand eventually." Richard's thin lips curved into what passed for a smile on his weathered face. "That's why I keep you around, Jess. You understand how the world actually works." The helicopter touched down, stirring up dust and pine needles. Through the window, Richard could see a small gathering of people waiting at the edge of the clearing. Most wore casual clothing, jeans, flannel shirts, practical boots, a stark contrast to Richard's tailored Italian suit and Jessica's sleek business ensemble. "Country bumpkins playing at environmental activism," Richard muttered as he gathered his briefcase. "This won't take long." As they stepped out of the helicopter, the crisp mountain air hit them, clean, pine-scented and cool even in early summer. Jessica inhaled deeply despite herself. After years in climate-controlled skyscrapers and luxury hotels, something about this air felt almost forbidden in its purity. A tall man with silver-streaked black hair stepped forward from the group. His weathered face suggested a life lived outdoors, and his eyes, dark and steady, held Richard's gaze without wavering. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm Thomas Eagle. We spoke on the phone. Welcome to Eagle Creek." Richard didn't bother with pleasantries. "Let's not waste time, Mr. Eagle. You've seen our proposals. Your community sits on prime real estate that has been underutilized for generations. The Eagle Crest Resort will change that." Thomas didn't flinch. "This land has been the home of my people for thousands of years, Mr. Montgomery. What you call underutilized, we call preserved." Jessica stepped forward, slipping effortlessly into her role as mediator. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere. More comfortable? We've brought the complete presentation." Thomas nodded. "We've prepared a space in the community center." He gestured toward a modest wooden building visible beyond a stand of pines. "Our elders and council members are waiting." As they walked, Jessica took in the surroundings. Eagle Creek wasn't what she had expected. Instead of the backward rural community Richard had described, she saw a well-maintained town that existed in harmony with its natural setting. Solar panels gleamed on several rooftops. A small school stood near what appeared to be a community garden. Children played along the banks of the river under the watchful eyes of adults. Inside the community center, about 20 people had gathered around a large table. Richard launched into his presentation without waiting for introductions, his tone condescending as he explained how his resort would revitalize and modernize Eagle Creek. The Eagle Crest Resort will be the crown jewel of Montgomery luxury. "Resorts," Richard proclaimed, as Jessica displayed sleek architectural renderings on her tablet. 300 luxury suites, a championship golf course, helicopter pads, spa facilities, and exclusive hunting experiences. We'll bring the world's elite to your doorstep. An elderly woman with silver braids interrupted. And where will the 50 families whose homes sit on that land go? Richard waved his hand dismissively. We've allocated funds for relocation compensation. More than generous, considering most of those properties are barely worth the land they're built on. A murmur of anger rippled through the room. Jessica winced internally, but maintained her professional mask. This wasn't going well. Thomas Eagle remained calm. Mr. Montgomery, you might not understand what this community represents. Many here are descendants of the original Blackfeet people who inhabited this valley. Others came generations ago, drawn by the same beauty you now see as a commodity. We've built something unique here, a community that honors both heritage and sustainability. Progress waits for no one, Mr. Eagle, Richard said sharply. Your unique community is sitting on land worth billions in the right hands. My hands. The contracts are already being processed. This meeting is a courtesy, not a consultation. A young woman stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. You can't just come in here and... Actually, I can, Richard interrupted. And I have. The land rights have been legally secured through the proper channels. Construction begins in 60 days. Jessica glanced at the faces around the room. Shock, anger, and in some, a strange resignation. This wasn't the first time an outsider had tried to claim what was theirs. She felt a sudden, unexpected pang of sympathy. Mr. Montgomery, she said quietly, perhaps we could address some of their specific concerns about cultural preservation and environmental impact. Richard shot her a look of surprise and irritation. We covered that in Section 12 of the prospectus, Jess. No need to revisit. The meeting deteriorated from there. By the time Richard announced it was over, the tension in the room was palpable. As they walked back toward the helicopter, Jessica noticed groups of community members speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Well, that was a waste of time, Richard said, checking his watch. We'll fly to Bozeman for the night. I want to be back in New York by tomorrow afternoon for the board meeting. As they approached the helicopter, Thomas Eagle appeared beside them, moving with surprising quietness for a man his size. Mr. Montgomery, our council has requested that you reconsider your approach. We're prepared to discuss alternatives that would benefit both your company and our community. Richard scoffed. There are no alternatives, Mr. Eagle. The Eagle Crest Resort will be built. Your people can either accept the compensation packages and move on, or make things difficult and receive nothing. Your choice. Thomas's expression remained calm, but something shifted in his eyes. In our traditions, Mr. Montgomery, when someone cannot hear with their ears, sometimes they must be taught to listen with their heart. Spare me your mystical nonsense, Richard snapped, pushing past him toward the helicopter. Jessica lingered for a moment. I apologize for his manner, Mr. Eagle. Is there perhaps some compromise? Ms. Parker, Thomas interrupted gently, some journeys must be taken alone before they can be shared with others. Your employer has much to learn. Something in his tone sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. Before she could respond, Richard called impatiently from the helicopter doorway. She hurried to join him. As the helicopter lifted off, Jessica looked down at the community growing smaller beneath them. For a moment, she thought she saw the people gathering in a circle around Thomas Eagle, but then clouds obscured her view. Primitives, Richard muttered beside her. Clinging to the past while the future moves on without them. They'll thank me eventually when their worthless land turns into something valuable. Jessica nodded automatically, but for the first time in her 5 years working for Richard Montgomery, she wasn't entirely convinced he was right. Later that evening, in their luxury suite at the Bozeman Grand Hotel, Jessica was reviewing the day's notes when Richard burst into the room, his face flushed with anger. The board meeting tomorrow has been cancelled, he announced, pacing the room like a caged animal. Why? What happened? Jessica asked immediately. Concerned. Board meetings were never cancelled, especially on such short notice. Richard thrust his phone at her. This happened. Someone leaked details of the Eagle Creek acquisition to the press. There's already a social media campaign building against us. Native lands threatened by corporate greed. The usual environmental hysteria. Jessica scanned the article on the screen, her stomach sinking. The piece was surprisingly detailed, with quotes from several Eagle Creek residents and environmental experts questioning the legality and ethics of the acquisition. This could be problematic for the project timeline, she said carefully. Richard snatched the phone back. It's a minor setback. I'm flying back tonight. I need to do damage control in person. You're staying here. Jessica looked up in surprise. Staying here? Why? Because someone needs to keep an eye on these troublemakers in Eagle Creek. Find out who leaked this information. Meet with local officials. Remind them of the economic benefits at stake. Use whatever leverage necessary. Jessica nodded slowly. How long do you want me to stay? As long as it takes, Richard said, already packing his briefcase. Don't return to New York until you've contained this situation. I didn't build a billion-dollar empire by letting a bunch of tree huggers and their pet journalists derail my projects. After Richard left for his emergency flight, Jessica sat alone in the hotel suite, staring out at the Montana night sky. The stars here were impossibly bright, nothing like the muted glow visible from her Manhattan apartment. She thought about the faces of the people in Eagle Creek, their anger, yes, but also their dignity and determination. For the first time in her career, Jessica wondered if she was on the wrong side of the battle. The thought was so foreign, so contrary to everything she'd worked for, that she pushed it away immediately. This was business, progress, the inevitable march of development that had shaped America from its beginning. Wasn't it? She turned back to her laptop, determined to focus on strategy. But Thomas Eagle's words kept echoing in her mind. Some journeys must be taken alone before they can be shared with others. Jessica had the strange, unsettling feeling that her journey was just beginning. The next morning, Jessica awoke to her phone buzzing incessantly, 6 missed calls from Richard, and a flurry of urgent emails demanding updates. She quickly called him back. "Jess, this situation is escalating." Richard's voice crackled through the speaker, tense and irritated. The share price dropped 3% at opening. 3% because of some backwater protest. "I'm heading to Eagle Creek today," Jessica assured him, already mentally planning her approach. "I'll meet with local officials and try to identify the source of the leak." "Do whatever it takes," Richard ordered. "I've invested too much in this project to let it fail. The board is getting nervous, and I don't do nervous investors." After hanging up, Jessica dressed in her most approachable business attire, still professional but less intimidating than her usual Manhattan power suits. She needed to build bridges today, not burn them. The drive from Bozeman to Eagle Creek took nearly 2 hours along winding mountain roads. The landscape was breathtaking, towering pines, dramatic cliffs, and glimpses of wildlife that made Jessica slow the rental car more than once to watch deer grazing in meadows or an eagle soaring overhead. As she approached Eagle Creek, she was struck again by how the community seemed to blend with its natural surroundings rather than impose upon them. Homes were built from local timber and stone, nestled among trees rather than clearing them away. A far cry from the glass and steel monuments Richard specialized in constructing. Jessica parked near the community center and was surprised to find Thomas Eagle waiting outside, as if he'd been expecting her. "Good morning, Miss Parker," he greeted her with a slight nod. "We thought you might return." Jessica maintained her professional demeanor. "Mr. Eagle, I'm here to discuss yesterday's meeting and address any concerns your community might have about the Eagle Crest project." Thomas's weathered face revealed nothing. "Walk with me," he said simply, turning toward a path that led away from the center, toward the river. Jessica hesitated, but then followed. Her job was to smooth things over, after all. As they walked, Thomas pointed out features of the community: the school where environmental science was taught alongside traditional knowledge, the clinic that combined modern medicine with native healing practices, the community gardens that supplied much of the town's produce. "Eagle Creek isn't just a place, Miss Parker," Thomas explained as they reached the riverbank. "It's a way of life, a balance between honoring the old ways and embracing the best of the new. Jessica listened despite herself. There was something compelling about Thomas's quiet dignity. "I understand your attachment to this place," she said carefully, "but you must understand that development is inevitable. The resort will bring jobs, infrastructure, improvements." Thomas interrupted her with a raised hand. "We've heard those promises before. The jobs go to outsiders. The infrastructure serves the wealthy visitors, and our people are left with menial positions and a destroyed homeland." Before Jessica could respond, they were approached by a group of Eagle Creek residents. Jessica recognized several faces from yesterday's meeting, including the elderly woman with silver braids. "This is Sarah Whitefeather," Thomas introduced the older woman. "She is our eldest council member and keeper of our stories." Sarah regarded Jessica with sharp, intelligent eyes that belied her 80-plus years. "You carry yourself like someone who knows her path, young woman, but do you know what lies at the end of it?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here to discuss the resort project, not philosophy." Sarah smiled knowingly. "They are not as separate as you think." The group led Jessica to a small clearing by the river where several wooden chairs had been arranged in a circle. She reluctantly took a seat, maintaining her professional composure despite the unorthodox setting for a business meeting. "Ms. Parker," Thomas began, "we invited you here today because we believe you might listen where your employer would not." "Mr. Montgomery is fully committed to this project," Jessica stated firmly. "Yes, we gathered that," said a younger man whom Thomas introduced as Michael Running Bear, the community's environmental scientist. He held up a tablet displaying the same article Richard had shown her. "This is only the beginning of our resistance. Your company's reputation will suffer if you proceed." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to leaking confidential information to the press?" Michael shook his head. "We didn't leak anything. The journalist reached out to us after learning about the land sale through public records. We simply told our side of the story." Jessica made a mental note to have the legal team check if any confidentiality agreements had been violated. Regardless, the acquisition is legal and binding. "Legal doesn't always mean right," said a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Lisa Greenwood, the town's schoolteacher. "This land has cultural and historical significance that goes beyond property rights." For the next hour, Jessica listened as community members shared stories about Eagle Creek, its history, its traditions, the challenges they'd overcome to preserve their way of life. Despite herself, she was moved by their passion and their clear connection to the land. "What exactly do you want from me?" she finally asked when the stories subsided. Thomas leaned forward. "We want you to truly see Eagle Creek before it's destroyed. Spend a few days here. Learn what would be lost. Then take that knowledge back to Mr. Montgomery." Jessica almost laughed. "Mr. Montgomery isn't interested in cultural preservation. He's interested in return on investment." "And yet," Sarah Whitefeather said softly, "he sent you here alone. Perhaps he values your judgment more than you realize." Before Jessica could respond, her phone rang. Richard again. She excused herself and walked a few paces away to take the call. "Tell me you fixed this mess," Richard demanded without preamble. "I'm meeting with community representatives now," Jessica replied. "It's complicated, Richard. They have legitimate concerns about—" "I don't pay you to validate their concerns, Jess," Richard cut her off. "I pay you to eliminate obstacles. The board is breathing down my neck. Fix this. Today." The call ended abruptly. Jessica stood, for a moment, staring at her phone, an unfamiliar feeling of discomfort settling in her chest. When she returned to the circle, she found all eyes on her. "Your employer seems upset," Thomas observed calmly. Jessica straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Montgomery is understandably concerned about the project timeline. Now, if we could discuss realistic compensation packages for relocation." "We're not interested in compensation," Michael stated firmly. "We're interested in preservation." Jessica felt her professional patience wearing thin. "Then I'm afraid we've reached an impasse." Thomas and Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance. Then Sarah spoke, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone listen. There is another way, the elder woman said. An old tradition of our people, used when someone must learn a difficult truth. Jessica raised an eyebrow. What tradition? We call it the listening, Thomas explained. It is a time of isolation and teaching where one who cannot hear with the ears learns to listen with the heart. Something about his tone made Jessica uneasy. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I have a job to do. As do we, Thomas replied. Protecting our home is our job, Ms. Parker. Sometimes that requires unconventional methods. Jessica stood, suddenly aware that more community members had gathered around the clearing. I think this meeting is over. I'll be in touch with formal proposals tomorrow. As she turned to leave, Sarah's voice stopped her. Your boss, Mr. Montgomery? He values this resort above all else? Jessica paused. This project represents hundreds of millions in investment and potential revenue. So yes, it's extremely important to him. Sarah nodded slowly. And what would he do if something threatened that investment? Something beyond a few newspaper articles? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Jessica felt a chill despite the warm day. If you're suggesting some kind of sabotage or interference, we're suggesting nothing, Thomas interrupted smoothly, merely asking what a man like Richard Montgomery values most. Is it money, power, or is there something else beneath the surface? Jessica regarded them suspiciously. I should go. Thomas nodded. Of course. But our invitation stands. Spend time in Eagle Creek. See what's at stake. Then decide where you stand. On the drive back to her hotel in Bozeman, Jessica couldn't shake the strange conversation from her mind. There had been something unsettling about the way Thomas and Sarah spoke, as if they knew something she didn't. As if they were planning something. She called Richard as soon as she reached her hotel room. They're planning some kind of protest action, she reported. Nothing specific yet, but they're determined to stop the project. Richard sighed heavily. Amateur activists, all passion, no strategy. Have security increased at the site. And Jess? Yes? I'm counting on you. Don't let me down. After hanging up, Jessica poured herself a glass of wine from the minibar and stood by the window, looking out toward the distant mountains where Eagle Creek nestled against the wilderness. For the first time in her career, praise from Richard didn't give her the usual satisfaction. Instead, she felt torn between her loyalty to him and a growing sense that something about this project was fundamentally wrong. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. The eagle sees both the shadow and the light. Which will you choose to follow? T.E. Thomas Eagle. How had he gotten her number? Jessica closed the curtains and tried to focus on her work. She had reports to review, strategies to develop, a crisis to manage. Yet her mind kept returning to Eagle Creek, to the people whose lives would be upended by the resort, to Thomas's penetrating gaze and Sarah's knowing smile. This is ridiculous, she muttered to herself. It's just business, nothing personal. But as she drifted off to sleep that night, Jessica couldn't escape the feeling that the line between business and personal was blurring in ways she'd never experienced before. She dreamed of eagles soaring over mountains, of ancient forests being torn down by gleaming machines, of Richard Montgomery standing alone on a barren hilltop, surveying a kingdom of emptiness. Morning brought a flurry of crisis management. The story had grown overnight, with environmental groups announcing their support for Eagle Creek. Save Eagle Creek was trending on social media. Richard called 6 times before noon, each conversation more tense than the last. Get back to Eagle Creek, he finally ordered. Don't leave until you've found a way to break their resistance, offer more money, find their weak points, whatever it takes. Jessica packed quickly and headed back toward the mountain community, a sense of dread building within her. What exactly did Richard expect her to do? What lines was she willing to cross for the sake of a luxury resort? As she drove through the mountain pass leading to Eagle Creek, Jessica noticed something strange. The road ahead was blocked by fallen trees. Not one, but several massive pines lay across the pavement, too precisely placed to be a natural occurrence. She stopped the car and got out, surveying the blockade with growing alarm. This was no accident. This was deliberate. From the trees beside the road, figures emerged. Thomas Eagle, Michael Running Bear, and several others from the community. Their expressions were solemn, but determined. "What is this?" Jessica demanded, reaching for her phone. "This is illegal. You can't block a public road." "Sometimes," Thomas said quietly, "one must break a small law to prevent a greater injustice." Jessica backed toward her car. "I'm calling the sheriff." "The sheriff is aware," Michael replied calmly. "He's sympathetic to our cause. It will be hours before anyone comes. That'll clear the road." "What do you want?" Jessica asked, a tremor in her voice despite her efforts to remain composed. Thomas stepped forward, his tall figure imposing yet somehow not threatening. "We want you to truly see Eagle Creek, Miss Parker, not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a living community worth preserving. And if I refuse?" Sarah Whitefeather emerged from behind the others, leaning on a carved walking stick. "Then you will return to your boss with nothing but failure. The road will remain blocked. Construction crews will be delayed. Investors will grow more nervous." Jessica realized she was trapped, not physically, as she could easily turn around and drive back to Bozeman, but strategically. Richard had sent her to solve a problem. Returning without a solution wasn't an option. "Fine," she said stiffly. "I'll spend one day in your community, then you clear the road, and we discuss realistic compromises." Thomas shook his head slowly. "One day is not enough to understand what generations have built. You will stay with us for 1 week." "A week? That's impossible." "I have responsibilities, meetings." "Call your boss," Sarah suggested with a knowing smile. "Tell him you've made progress, but need more time to finalize details. Isn't that what corporate people say when they need to delay?" Jessica felt cornered. She couldn't return to Richard empty-handed. But a week in Eagle Creek, living among these people who stood between Richard and his ambitions. 3 days, she counted, falling back on her negotiation training. "I'll stay 3 days, not a minute longer." Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. 3 days, Thomas agreed finally. "Beginning. Now." As Jessica reluctantly followed them down a footpath toward Eagle Creek, bypassing the blocked road, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more significant than a community protest. Something that might change not just the fate of Eagle Creek, but her own destiny as well. Jessica's first night in Eagle Creek was spent in a small but comfortable cabin on the edge of the community. The wooden structure was simple yet elegant, with handcrafted furniture and large windows that framed views of the surrounding forest. She'd been surprised when Sarah Whitefeather led her there, having expected something far more primitive. "We're not savages, Miss Parker," Sarah had said, with a knowing smile as if reading Jessica's thoughts. "We choose simplicity, not deprivation." Now, as morning sunlight filtered through pine branches outside her window, Jessica checked her phone for the 10th time. Still no signal. Thomas had explained that cell coverage was spotty in the valley, but she suspected her forced disconnection was part of their plan. She'd been able to send Richard a brief email using the community center's satellite internet yesterday, claiming she was making progress with negotiations and would report back in 3 days. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jessica opened it to find a young girl of about 11 standing on the porch, her dark hair in 2 neat braids, intelligent eyes studying Jessica with undisguised curiosity. "Good morning," the girl said politely. "I'm Lily Eagle. My grandfather sent me to bring you to breakfast." "Your grandfather is Thomas?" Jessica asked, surprised. Lily nodded. "He says you're here to learn about Eagle Creek so you won't destroy it." Jessica winced at the directness. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" Lily asked, with a wisdom beyond her years. "When something beautiful exists, why would anyone choose to destroy it?" Before Jessica could formulate a response, Lily turned and started down the path. "Breakfast is this way. Grandmother makes the best blueberry pancakes in Montana." Jessica quickly grabbed her jacket and followed, struck by the girl's confidence and articulation. As they walked through the community, residents nodded or waved to Lily, regarding Jessica with expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness. Thomas and Sarah's home was a spacious cabin near the center of town, its large porch wrapped around three sides of the structure. Inside, the open layout featured a living area dominated by a stone fireplace and a kitchen where Sarah was placing stacks of pancakes on the table. "Ah, Ms. Parker," Thomas greeted her. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," Jessica replied, cautiously. "And please call me Jessica." "Jessica," Thomas repeated with a nod. "Join us for breakfast. Today is the first day of your education." Despite her situation, Jessica found herself enjoying the meal. The pancakes were indeed exceptional. Made with wild blueberries Lily had apparently gathered herself. The conversation flowed naturally as Thomas and Sarah asked thoughtful questions about her life in New York, her career, her ambitions. "You've achieved much for someone so young," Sarah observed. "Harvard Business School, 5 years with Montgomery Resorts, rising quickly through the ranks." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You've researched me." "We believe in knowing who we're dealing with," Thomas replied unapologetically, "just as your company researched our land before deciding to take it." The reminder of her purpose here created an awkward silence broken by Lily. "Grandfather, isn't it time for Jessica's first visit?" Thomas checked his watch and nodded. "Indeed it is. Jessica, today you'll be spending the morning with Clara running water at the Healing Center. This afternoon, Michael will show you our environmental projects." Jessica set down her coffee cup. "I agreed to stay 3 days, not to participate in some kind of cultural immersion program." "You agreed to see Eagle Creek," Sarah countered smoothly. "That means understanding who we are, not just observing from a distance." Before Jessica could protest further, Lily tugged at her hand. "Clara makes the best herbal tea, and she knows everything about plants that can heal people." Jessica sighed, recognizing she had little choice. "Fine, lead the way." The Healing Center was housed in a beautiful structure that blended traditional, native design with modern elements. Inside, Jessica was surprised to find a space that combined aspects of a medical clinic, herbal dispensary, and wellness center. Clara running water, a serene woman in her 70s, greeted them warmly. "Welcome, Jessica. Thomas told me you would be visiting today." For the next 3 hours, Jessica found herself drawn into Clara's world. The elder woman showed her the extensive gardens where medicinal plants were grown, explaining their properties and uses. Inside, she demonstrated how traditional remedies were prepared alongside modern treatments. "We don't reject progress," Clara explained, as she carefully measured herbs for a tincture. "We embrace what works, whether it's 1,000 years old or discovered yesterday. Balance is our guiding principle." Jessica watched her skilled hands work, thinking of the sterile corporate wellness centers Montgomery Resorts installed in their properties, expensive, exclusive spaces that mimicked authentic experiences, while missing their essence entirely. "Your knowledge is impressive," Jessica admitted. "Have you lived in Eagle Creek all your life?" A shadow passed over Clara's face. "No, I spent 20 years away. Working in pharmaceutical research in Boston, actually." Jessica couldn't hide her surprise. "You were a pharmaceutical researcher?" Clara nodded. "PhD in biochemistry from MIT. I specialized in developing medications derived from traditional plant remedies." "What brought you back here?" Clara's hands stilled on the herbs. "My company was purchased by a larger corporation. My research, work that could have provided affordable treatments based on traditional knowledge, was shelved in favor of more profitable synthetic alternatives. I realized I was contributing to a system that valued profit over healing." She looked directly at Jessica. "That's when I knew I needed to come home and preserve the knowledge that was being lost." The parallel to the current situation was unmistakable. Jessica felt a flicker of discomfort, but pushed it aside. After lunch at the community center, where Jessica was introduced to more residents of Eagle Creek, Michael Runningbear arrived to show her the environmental projects. Michael was younger than many of the community leaders, perhaps in his late 30s, with an energy that contrasted with Thomas and Sarah's quiet dignity. As they walked toward the river, He explained that he'd studied environmental science at Stanford before returning to help his community develop sustainable practices. "This is our pride and joy," he said, as they reached a series of pools near the river. A natural filtration system that cleans runoff before it reaches the main waterway. The design is based on traditional knowledge, but enhanced with modern materials. Jessica examined the ingenious system, impressed despite herself. "This is remarkable engineering." "It's what your boss plans to bulldoze for the golf course," Michael said bluntly. Jessica had no response to that. They continued to other projects, solar arrays that powered much of the community, sustainable forestry practices that allowed selective harvesting without damaging the ecosystem, and gardens that combined native plants with innovative growing techniques. "The resort plans mention environmental consciousness," Jessica said defensively. "Richard isn't opposed to green initiatives." Michael's laugh held no humor. "Green initiatives as marketing, maybe. But this," he gestured around them, "this is sustainability as a way of life, not a selling point in a brochure." As afternoon faded into evening, Jessica found herself at the community center for dinner. Unlike the tense meeting of her first visit, tonight was apparently a regular community gathering. Tables were filled with families sharing meals, children playing, elders telling stories. Jessica was seated with Thomas, Sarah, and Lily, along with several other community leaders she'd met throughout the day. "What did you learn today, Jessica?" Thomas asked as they ate. Jessica considered the question carefully. "That Eagle Creek is more sophisticated than I initially assumed. Your integration of traditional knowledge and modern practices is impressive, yet not valuable enough to preserve," Sarah challenged gently. Jessica sighed. "I understand your attachment to this place, but Montgomery Resorts has legal rights to develop the property. The best outcome now is a fair compensation package that allows your community to relocate and rebuild." A man further down the table, Jessica recalled his name was Robert Greywolf, spoke up. "You speak of our community as if it's just buildings and gardens that can be reconstructed elsewhere. What about the generations of knowledge embedded in this specific place? The relationships with this particular land, these waters, these plants, and animals?" "The resort will preserve some natural features," Jessica began. "A curated wilderness experience for wealthy visitors," Michael interrupted. "Not a living relationship between people and land." The conversation continued in this vein through dinner, challenging Jessica's assumptions without ever becoming hostile. These people were passionate but articulate, their arguments grounded in both practical concerns and deeper values. After the meal, Thomas announced it was time for evening stories. The community gathered around a fire pit outside, and Jessica found herself seated on a log beside Lily. "This is my favorite part of the day," the girl whispered. Various community members took turns sharing tales, some clearly traditional legends, others personal experiences, all woven with humor and wisdom. Jessica was particularly struck by a story from an elder named Joseph Blackcloud, who described growing up in Eagle Creek during harder times when the community had nearly been destroyed by an earlier development project. "We lost half our people. Then," the old man said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "they scattered to cities, to other reservations. Many never found home again. They exist, but they don't belong anywhere. That's what happens when you break a community. You don't just destroy buildings, you shatter something inside people that may never heal." As the stories continued, Jessica found herself unexpectedly moved. These weren't the rehearsed cultural performances Montgomery Resorts sometimes arranged for guests at their heritage-themed properties. This was something authentic, a living tradition that connected people across generations. Later, walking back to her cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, Jessica was accompanied by Lily. "What did you think of the stories?" the girl asked. "They were meaningful," Jessica admitted. "Your community has a strong sense of identity." Lily nodded sagely. "Grandfather says stories are how we remember who we are. If we forget our stories, we forget ourselves." They reached Jessica's cabin, and she turned to thank the girl for escorting her. "Why do you work for someone who destroys beautiful things?" Lily asked suddenly, her young face serious in the moonlight. The question caught Jessica off guard. "Richard, Montgomery doesn't destroy things. He creates resorts that allow people to experience beautiful places. But they have to change those places first, right? Make them less wild, less free, more controlled." Jessica struggled to find a child-appropriate explanation for development economics. "It's complicated, Lily. There are jobs created, economic benefits." "Is money more important than everything else?" Lily persisted. "Of course not, but it is important. It's how the world works." Lily considered this. "My teacher says that's circular thinking. The world works that way because people, like your boss, make it work that way. But they could choose differently." Jessica stared at the child, momentarily speechless. "It's getting late, Lily. You should head home." Lily nodded. "Tomorrow you'll meet my friend's grandfather, Jacob Whitebear. He's really interesting. He knows your boss." This caught Jessica's attention. "He knows Richard? How?" But Lily was already skipping down the path, calling over her shoulder, "Good night, Jessica. Sleep well." Inside her cabin, Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, processing the day's experiences. She'd expected to find ammunition to use against the community's resistance, weaknesses in their organization, internal divisions she could exploit, unrealistic expectations she could moderate. Instead, she'd found a complex, sophisticated community with legitimate reasons for their opposition to the resort. More troubling were the small doubts beginning to form about her own role in Richard's empire. She'd always seen herself as part of creating beautiful experiences for people, of driving economic growth and opportunity. But today's conversations had raised uncomfortable questions about what was lost in that process. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "They're deliberately trying to manipulate me." Yet as she prepared for bed, Lily's simple question echoed in her mind. "Why do you work for someone who destroys beautiful things?" Jessica had no answer that satisfied her. For the first time in years, she fell asleep questioning the path she'd chosen and the man she'd dedicated her career to serving. Jessica woke the next morning to a gentle knock on her door. Expecting Lily again, she was surprised to find Thomas Eagle waiting on the porch, a thermos in hand. "Good morning, Jessica. I thought you might appreciate some coffee before we begin today's journey." She accepted the thermos gratefully. "Journey? I thought I was meeting someone named Jacob today." Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. "Jacob Whitebear lives a bit farther from the center of our community. It's about an hour's hike. I hope you brought comfortable shoes." Jessica glanced down at her designer loafers, entirely unsuitable for mountain hiking. Reading her concern, Thomas smiled. "Sarah, thought you might need these." He handed her a bag containing a pair of well-worn but sturdy hiking boots. "They belonged to our daughter before she moved to Seattle. They should fit you." An hour later, Jessica found herself following Thomas along a narrow trail that wound through dense forest and across small streams. Despite her initial reluctance, she was enjoying the hike. The morning air was crisp and pine-scented, the forest alive with birdsong and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures. "Your daughter lives in Seattle?" Jessica asked, breaking a comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Yes, Amanda is an environmental attorney," Thomas replied with evident pride. "She works primarily with indigenous communities fighting against corporate land grabs. Quite successful, actually." Jessica processed this information. "Is she involved in your resistance to the Eagle Crest Resort?" Thomas glanced back at her. "She's providing legal advice, yes, but our community is leading this fight ourselves." They continued in silence for a while longer before Jessica asked the question that had been bothering her since the previous evening. "Thomas, who is Jacob Whitebear?" Lily mentioned he knows Richard Montgomery. Thomas's pace slowed slightly. "Jacob is one of our most respected elders. As for his connection to your employer," he paused, "it's Jacob's story to tell, not mine." The trail eventually opened into a small clearing where a modest cabin stood beside a rushing stream. Smoke curled from the chimney, and an elderly man sat on the porch carving something from a piece of wood. He looked up as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Thomas, right on time, as always. His gaze shifted to Jessica, dark eyes studying her intently. "And you must be Montgomery's right hand." Jessica straightened her shoulders. "Jessica Parker, executive assistant to Richard Montgomery." The old man nodded, setting aside his carving. "I'm Jacob Whitebear. Welcome to my home." He gestured to chairs on the porch. "And please sit, I've made tea." As Thomas helped Jacob bring out a tray with a teapot and cups, Jessica studied the old man. He appeared to be in his 70s, his silver, hair pulled back in a traditional braid, his movements deliberate but still strong. There was something familiar about him that she couldn't quite place. "Thomas tells me you've been learning about our community," Jacob said as he poured fragrant tea into handmade ceramic cups. "Yes," Jessica replied cautiously. "It's been educational." Jacob's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Not what you expected from a bunch of backward natives standing in the way of progress." Jessica flushed. "I never said—" "But Richard did, didn't he?" Jacob interrupted gently. "That's always been his way. Anything he doesn't understand or can't control is dismissed as primitive or irrelevant." Jessica stared at him. "You really do know Richard?" Jacob nodded slowly. "I knew Richard Montgomery when he was just Rick, a young man with big dreams and a bigger ego." He sipped his tea. "I worked for him for 25 years. "You worked for Montgomery Resorts?" Jessica couldn't hide her surprise. "Not the corporation it is today. Back then it was just Montgomery Lodges, 3 small properties in Montana and Wyoming. I was his environmental consultant and guide." Jacob's gaze drifted to the mountains visible beyond the trees. "I taught Rick everything he knows about sustainable development, or used to know, before he forgot it all." Thomas excused himself, mentioning chores that needed attention back in the community, leaving Jessica alone with Jacob. As soon as Thomas was out of earshot, Jessica leaned forward. "Mr. Whitebear, I'm trying to understand what's happening here. This community seems to be going to extraordinary lengths to block the resort development, blocking roads, essentially holding me hostage." "Are you a hostage, Jessica?" Jacob asked mildly. "Has anyone threatened you, prevented you from leaving?" She hesitated. "Not explicitly, no. But the road—" "The road is clear now," Jacob said. "It was opened yesterday afternoon. You could leave any time you wish." Jessica sat back, processing this information. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Perhaps because you haven't tried to leave." Jacob's expression was knowing. "Perhaps because part of you wants to understand what's happening here." Jessica changed. "Tactics. You said you worked for Richard for 25 years. What happened?" Jacob's face grew somber. "What happened is that success changed Rick Montgomery. When I met him, he was idealistic, determined to create resorts that existed in harmony with nature. The first Montgomery Lodge was a marvel of sustainable design for its time, built with local materials, minimal environmental footprint, energy efficient. Guests came to experience the wilderness, not to conquer it." He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the stream. As the business grew, priorities shifted. Each new property became more extravagant, more disruptive to the natural environment. What once was appreciation became exploitation. "Richard still implements green initiatives," Jessica defended. "All Montgomery properties have sustainability programs." Jacob's laugh held no humor. "Green initiatives? You mean the recycling bins and those little cards asking guests to reuse towels? That's marketing, not commitment." He turned to face her. "The Richard Montgomery I knew understood the difference." Jessica felt uncomfortable under his penetrating gaze. People change. Businesses evolve. "Indeed they do." Jacob returned to his seat. 15 years ago, when Montgomery Resorts was expanding internationally, Rick called me into his office, told me my services were no longer required, said my rustic approach didn't align with the company's new luxury direction. He reached inside his shirt and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. "I wrote this letter to him when I thought I was dying. 10 years ago, I had a heart attack. While recovering, I reflected on all that had been lost. Not just my job, but Rick's vision, his connection to what truly matters. Jacob held the letter out to Jessica. I never sent it. By then, I knew he wouldn't listen. But perhaps you will. Jessica hesitated before taking the envelope. I don't understand what you expect me to do with this. Read it, then decide. Jacob stood, signaling the conversation was over. Thomas will return for you this afternoon. Until then, you're welcome to explore the area. The stream has some excellent fishing spots if you're interested. Left alone on the porch, Jessica stared at the envelope in her hands. Her professional instincts told her this was irrelevant sentimentality from a disgruntled former employee. Yet something about Jacob's sincerity had touched her. She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Rick, I'm writing this from a hospital bed, uncertain if I'll see another spring. The doctors say my heart is failing, and as I face my own mortality, I find myself thinking of you and the journey we once shared. Do you remember the night we sat by Eagle Creek planning your first lodge? You spoke with such passion about creating places where people could reconnect with nature without destroying it. We can be successful without sacrificing what matters, you said. I believed you then. I think you believed it too. What happened to that man, Rick? When did profit become more important than purpose? When did you stop seeing the beauty in simplicity, in harmony and balance? The last time we spoke, you called my approaches outdated and impractical. You laughed at my concerns about the environmental impact of your Thailand resort. Times change, Jacob, you said. Evolve or get left behind. But some truths don't change, Rick. The earth doesn't care about your quarterly profits. The forests don't understand market capitalization. The rivers don't recognize your brand. For 25 years, I shared the wisdom of my ancestors with you. I taught you how to read the land, how to work with it, rather than against it. You used that knowledge to build your empire, then discarded it, and me, when it no longer served your ambition. I don't write this from bitterness, though I won't deny I felt betrayed. I write because the young man I once knew would be ashamed of the tycoon he became. That young man understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in purpose, in legacy, in harmony. If I recover from this illness, I'll return to Eagle Creek, to the community that has always been my true home. If these are my final days, I'll die with the comfort of knowing I remain true to what matters. My hope is that someday, something will awaken in you the understanding you once had, that we don't own the earth, we belong to it. That success, without meaning, is the hollowest of victories. Your old friend, Jacob Whitebear. Jessica lowered the letter, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. The raw honesty of Jacob's words had pierced something in her, perhaps because they echoed doubt she'd begun to harbor herself. She spent the next few hours walking along the stream, her mind churning with conflicting thoughts. The Jessica, who had arrived in Eagle Creek 3 days ago, would have dismissed Jacob's letter as manipulative emotional leverage. But after what she'd seen and heard in the community, his words rang with authenticity. When Thomas returned to escort her back to the community, Jessica was quieter than usual. Still processing Jacob's revelations, Thomas seemed to understand her need for silence, leading the way without pressing for conversation. Back in Eagle Creek, they found the community center abuzz with activity. Tables were being set up, food prepared, decorations hung. What's happening? Jessica asked. Community celebration, Thomas explained. It happens to be our annual Heritage Festival. Good timing for your visit. You'll see Eagle Creek at its most vibrant. Jessica was introduced to dozens more community members throughout the evening as the festival got underway. Children performed traditional dances, elders shared stories, and tables groaned under the weight of dishes that combined traditional native foods with contemporary cuisine. To her surprise, Jessica found herself enjoying the celebration. The genuine warmth of the community was infectious, and she found herself laughing at the children's antics, admiring the intricate beadwork displayed by local artisans, and even joining in a simple dance when invited by Lily. "You're not as stiff as you look," the girl commented with typical childhood frankness, making Jessica laugh out loud. Later, as the celebration continued under stars and strings of solar-powered lights, Jessica found herself seated beside Sarah Whitefeather, watching the festivities. "You seem different tonight," the elder woman observed. "More present." Jessica considered this. "I met Jacob Whitebear today." Sarah nodded knowingly. "Ah, Jacob has a way of making people see things differently. He showed me a letter he wrote to Richard years ago. It was affecting." "Jacob's heart attack nearly took him from us," Sarah said softly. "When he recovered, he returned to Eagle Creek a changed man, more determined than ever to preserve our way of life." Jessica hesitated before asking her next question. "Sarah, be honest with me. Is all of this, my being here, meeting everyone, the festival, is it all an orchestrated attempt to manipulate me into opposing the resort?" Sarah's laughter was genuine. "My dear, the festival has been planned for months. As for the rest," she gazed out at the celebrating community, "we are simply showing you what will be lost. What you choose to do with that knowledge is entirely up to you." Jessica was saved from responding by Lily, who appeared to drag her into another dance. For the next hour, she allowed herself to be fully present in the celebration, pushing aside thoughts of Richard, Montgomery resorts, and the conflict that had brought her here. It was nearly midnight when Jessica finally returned to her cabin, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. The community's joy had been contagious, their pride in their heritage palpable. She couldn't help comparing it to the manufactured, authentic experiences Montgomery resorts created for wealthy guests, pale imitations of the real thing. As she prepared for bed, her phone suddenly chimed, the first signal she'd had in days. Jessica lunged for it, finding multiple missed calls and increasingly angry texts from Richard. The most recent sent just minutes ago. "Whatever game you're playing stops now. Either you fix this situation or you're fired. I'm arriving tomorrow to handle things personally. 10 a.m. meeting at the Bozeman Grand. Be there." Jessica stared at the message, her momentary contentment evaporating. Tomorrow was the end of her agreed 3 days in Eagle Creek. Richard's arrival complicated everything. She sat on the edge of the bed, Jacob's letter still vivid in her mind, the sounds of the community celebration still echoing in her ears. For the first time in her career, Jessica faced a clear ethical crossroads, and she had less than 12 hours to decide which path to take. Dawn broke over Eagle Creek with golden light filtering through the pines. Jessica had barely slept, her mind racing with indecision. Richard's text had made her situation painfully clear. Either she returned to her role as his loyal lieutenant, or her career at Montgomery Resorts was over. She packed her few belongings, mechanically, rehearsing what she would say to Thomas and the others. They had shown her kindness and opened their community to her. She owed them an explanation at least. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jessica opened it to find not just Thomas, but Sarah, Lily, Michael, Clara, and several other community members waiting outside. "Good morning, Jessica," Thomas greeted her, his eyes taking in her packed bag. "I see you're preparing to leave." Jessica nodded, uncomfortable under their collective gaze. "My 3 days are up. And Richard, Mr. Montgomery, is arriving in Bozeman this morning. I need to meet him." "Of course," Thomas said, his voice neutral. "We've come to escort you back to your car." The walk through the community felt like a procession. More, residents emerged from their homes to nod or wave goodbye. Jessica was struck by how many faces she now recognized, how many names she knew. In just 3 days, Eagle Creek had become more than an abstract obstacle to a development project. The community center, a small breakfast had been prepared. Jessica tried to decline, explaining she needed to leave immediately, but Sarah's gentle insistence wore down her resistance. "Breaking bread together is important," the elder woman said, "especially at partings." Over breakfast, no one mentioned the resort or Richard's arrival. Instead, they shared stories and laughter, treating Jessica as an honored guest rather than an adversary. The warmth of their inclusion made her coming betrayal even more difficult to bear, because returning to Richard, supporting the resort project, would be a betrayal. Jessica could no longer pretend otherwise. As the meal concluded, Thomas presented her with a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. "A gift from our community," he explained, as Jessica opened it to reveal a delicate silver pendant in the shape of an eagle in flight, inlaid with turquoise. "To remind you of your time with us?" Jessica's throat tightened. "I don't deserve this." "It's not about deserving," Clara said gently. "It's about remembering." Lily stepped forward then, offering a folded piece of paper covered in colorful drawings. "I made this for you. It's a map of Eagle Creek, so you won't forget what's here." Jessica accepted it, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The child's drawing showed the community in vibrant detail. The river, the mountains, the buildings, even tiny figures representing the people she'd met. Finally, it was time to leave. Thomas and Michael would drive her to where her rental car remained parked near the originally blocked road. The goodbyes were brief but heartfelt, with promises from several community members that she was welcome to return any time. As they drove through the forest, Jessica fingered the eagle pendant now hanging around her neck. "Thomas, I need you to understand something. Richard Montgomery isn't going to change his mind. When I tell him about these past 3 days, he'll dismiss it all as emotional manipulation." Thomas kept his eyes on the rough road. "We didn't bring you here to convert you into an activist, Jessica. We brought you here so you could see the truth with your own eyes. What you do with that truth is your choice." "But what if I can't?" "Stop him?" The question escaped before she could suppress it, revealing more of her internal conflict than she'd intended. Michael turned from the passenger seat to look at her. "Sometimes the most important victories aren't about stopping something, but about standing for something." They reached her car too quickly. As Jessica transferred her bag to the trunk, Thomas handed her a final envelope. "From Jacob," he explained. "He asked that you read it before meeting with Richard." Jessica placed it carefully in her purse. Then, they extended her hand to Thomas. "Thank you for your hospitality. Whatever happens, I want you to know I understand why you're fighting so hard." Thomas clasped her hand in both of his. "Safe journey, Jessica Parker. Remember that paths sometimes diverge before they reconnect." The drive to Bozeman gave Jessica time to think. The Montana landscape rolled past her window, vast, wild, and breathtaking. In Manhattan, surrounded by steel and glass, it was easy to forget places like this existed. Easy to reduce them to numbers on a development proposal, potential profit centers on a spreadsheet. Halfway to Bozeman, Jessica pulled over at a scenic overlook. The mountains stretched before her, ancient and enduring. She took out Jacob's envelope and opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a photograph, yellowed with age, showing 2 young men standing proudly in front of a small rustic lodge. One was unmistakably Jacob, his hair still black, his stance strong and confident. The other, to Jessica's shock, was Richard Montgomery, but a Richard she hardly recognized. This younger Richard stood with his arm around Jacob's shoulders, his face open and smiling, without the hardened cynicism that now permanently creased his features. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, a far cry from his current uniform of tailored designer suits. On the back of the photo, Jacob had written, "Opening Day, 1st Montgomery Lodge, 1989. Remember who you were." Jessica stared at the image for a long time, trying to reconcile this younger, idealistic version of Richard with the ruthless CEO she knew. What had happened to that young man who stood proudly beside his native guide, building something that worked with the land rather than imposing upon it? She arrived at the Bozeman Grand Hotel with 15 minutes to spare before her meeting with Richard. In the lobby restroom, Jessica changed from her borrowed hiking clothes into the business attire she'd packed, applying makeup and styling her hair to restore her professional appearance. As she worked, she caught sight of the eagle pendant still hanging around her neck. After a moment's hesitation, she left it on, tucking it beneath her blouse where only she would know it was there. Richard was waiting in a private meeting room adjacent to the hotel restaurant, his back to the door as he gazed out the window at the mountains beyond. At the sound of her entrance, he turned, his expression a mixture of irritation and relief. "Finally," he said by way of greeting. "I was beginning to think they'd converted you to their cause." Jessica set her purse down on the conference table. "It's good to see you too, Richard." He waved away her mild sarcasm. "Skip the pleasantries. What's the situation with these protesters? The board is breathing down my neck about the delays. The share price dropped another 2 points yesterday." Jessica took a deep breath. "The protesters are a community of people fighting to preserve their home and way of life. After spending 3 days with them, I believe their concerns are legitimate and should be addressed." Richard stared at her as if she'd started speaking in tongues. "Excuse me? You spent 3 days with these people and came back spouting their propaganda? What the hell happened to you, Jess?" "I saw things differently, that's all." Jessica maintained her professional tone. "Eagle Creek isn't just some backwater settlement. It's a sophisticated, sustainable community with deep cultural roots. The resort would destroy something valuable." Richard's face darkened. "I didn't send you there to admire the local color. I sent you to break their resistance, to find weaknesses we could exploit." "And if there aren't any," Jessica challenged, "what if their resistance is based on something valid?" Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Valid? The only valid consideration here is that I legally purchased development. Rights to that land. Everything else is noise." Jessica reached into her purse and withdrew Jacob's photograph, sliding it across the table. "Do you remember him?" Richard's expression froze as he stared at the image. For a brief moment, something like recognition, perhaps even regret, flickered across his features. Then his professional mask slammed back into place. "Jacob Whitebear," he said flatly. "He worked for me a lifetime ago." "He still lives in Eagle Creek," Jessica said quietly. "He showed me the letter he wrote to you when he thought he was dying. About how you changed, how you abandoned the principles you once shared." Richard's laugh was harsh. "Jacob was a useful guide when I was starting out. His environmental mumbo-jumbo made for good marketing copy in the early days. But business evolves, Jessica. Sentimentality is a luxury I can't afford." Jessica felt a surge of disappointment. She'd hoped, irrationally perhaps, that Jacob's photograph might trigger some transformation in Richard, some reconnection with his earlier values. But the man before her seemed unreachable. "The community has growing support," she tried again. "Environmental groups are rallying behind them. The negative publicity can be managed," Richard interrupted dismissively. "That's what our PR department is for. Speaking of which, I've called in Calvin from Crisis Management. He's flying in this afternoon to take over this situation." Jessica straightened. "Take over? I thought I was handling the Eagle Creek project." Richard's expression softened slightly, the look he used when delivering unwelcome news to valuable employees. "You were. But after your extended stay with the opposition, I'm concerned your objectivity has been compromised." "My objectivity?" Jessica repeated incredulously. "Richard, I'm the only person on your team who's actually spent time understanding what's at stake." "Exactly my point." He tapped his fingers on the table impatiently. "You were supposed to gather intelligence, not go native. Calvin will approach this from a purely strategic perspective, without emotional entanglements." Jessica felt a surge of indignation. "So that's it? You're sidelining me because I suggested considering their perspective?" "I'm reassigning you because you've lost focus on what matters." Richard's tone was final. "The Eagle Crest Resort represents a potential $800 million in revenue over the next decade. Nothing, not some quaint community, not fading traditions, not the feelings of former employees. Nothing trumps that bottom line." Jessica sat in stunned silence, absorbing the coldness of his calculus. In that moment, she saw Richard Montgomery with complete clarity, not as the mentor she'd admired, but as the man he'd truly become, someone who measured everything, even people's homes and lives, in dollar values. "What would you like me to do now?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Richard seemed relieved by her apparent acceptance. "Return to New York. Handle the Thompson account while I'm away. When this Eagle Creek situation is resolved, we can discuss your next project." He glanced at his watch. "I have a conference call in 5 minutes. We'll talk more at dinner. 7 o'clock, hotel restaurant." After he left, Jessica remained seated, staring at the photograph still lying on the conference table. The younger Richard's smile seemed to mock her from across the decades, a reminder of what had been lost. Her phone chimed with a text from Richard's executive secretary, confirming their dinner reservation and adding that the corporate jet was standing by to return Jessica to New York tomorrow morning. Everything was being decided for her, her path laid out with typical Montgomery efficiency. All she had to do was fall back in line. Jessica gathered her things and left the meeting. Room Jacob's photograph tucked safely in her purse. Instead of returning to her hotel room, she found herself walking out of the hotel, past the valet stand and into the streets of Bozeman. The mountain air was cool and clarifying after the climate-controlled sterility of the hotel. Jessica walked. Without destination, her mind churning with conflicting thoughts and emotions. Richard's dismissal of her concerns shouldn't have surprised her. He'd built his empire by prioritizing profit over all else. That she'd ever expected different now seemed naive, yet the sting of disappointment was real. For 5 years, she dedicated herself to his vision, believing she was part of creating something valuable. Now she questioned everything, not just the Eagle Crest project, but every resort she'd helped develop, every community displaced, every natural landscape altered beyond recognition. Without conscious intention, Jessica found herself outside a small, locally owned coffee shop. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. Reclaimed wood tables, local art on the walls, the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee. She ordered and took a seat by the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk outside. Regular people living regular lives, unaware of corporate decisions being made that might someday transform their community beyond recognition. Jessica pulled out her phone and, after a moment's hesitation, searched for information about Montgomery Resort's previous developments. Articles and images filled her screen, glowing reviews of luxury accommodations alongside less prominent stories about local opposition, environmental concerns, and communities forever altered. One headline caught her attention: 5 years later, how the Grand Teton Montgomery Resort changed Jackson Hole forever. The accompanying photo showed an imposing structure of glass and steel dominating what had once been a forested hillside. As Jessica read, a pattern emerged. Each Montgomery development followed the same trajectory. Initial local resistance, eventually overcome through a combination of legal pressure, financial incentives to key officials, strategic PR campaigns, and the simple reality that few small communities had the resources to fight a billion-dollar corporation indefinitely. Eagle Creek would be no different. Calvin from Crisis Management would arrive with his playbook of tactics. The community's resistance would be systematically dismantled. Construction would begin, and another unique place would be transformed into a playground for the wealthy, unless something changed the equation. Jessica's coffee grew cold as she sat thinking, weighing options and consequences. By the time she returned to the hotel, it was late afternoon and she'd made her decision. In her room, she changed into casual clothes and packed her suitcase. Then she sat down at the desk and wrote 2 letters. The first was her formal resignation from Montgomery Resorts, effective immediately. The second was a personal note to Richard. Richard, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Not just, say, from the Bozeman Grand, but from Montgomery Resorts entirely. I can't in good conscience continue to serve a vision I no longer believe in. The young man in Jacob's photograph understood something that you seem to have forgotten, that true success isn't measured quarterly, but generationally, not in dollars, but in legacy. Eagle Creek deserves to exist. Its people deserve to maintain their way of life. Their connection to that specific place, that land, those mountains and waters, is something no compensation package can replace. I don't expect this letter to change your mind, but I hope someday something will awaken in you the understanding you once had, that we are stewards of the places we touch, not their conquerors. Goodbye, Richard. Jessica. She placed both letters in envelopes and left them on the desk, where they would be easily found. Then she took one last look around the luxury suite, at the opulence that had once seemed the pinnacle of success, but now felt hollow, and walked out the door. The rental car agency was still open when Jessica arrived. She returned her current vehicle and rented another under her personal credit card rather than the corporate account. Then she pointed the car back toward the mountains, toward Eagle Creek. Night was falling as she drove, the Montana sky a spectacular canvas of fading purples and deepening blues. Jessica felt a strange sense of lightness despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, she was making a choice based not on career advancement or financial gain, but on what she believed was right. As the headlights cut through the growing darkness, Jessica rehearsed what she would say to Thomas Eagle and the others. She had no illusions that her defection would stop Richard. One former executive assistant couldn't stand against the full might of Montgomery Resorts, but perhaps she could help the community fight more effectively. She knew the corporate playbook after all. She understood how Richard thought, how he operated, what tactics Calvin would employ. That knowledge might prove valuable in the resistance. And maybe, just maybe, her unexpected alliance with Eagle Creek might give Richard pause, might make him question, however briefly, the path he'd chosen. The thought brought a small smile to Jessica's face as she drove deeper into the mountains, leaving behind the life she'd known and heading toward an uncertain future that somehow felt more real, more right than anything she'd experienced before. The expression on Thomas Eagle's face when Jessica returned to Eagle Creek shortly before midnight was worth every bit of uncertainty she felt about her future. Surprise gave way to understanding as she explained her decision, standing in the doorway of his home with her suitcase beside her. "You're welcome here," he said simply after she finished. "For as long as you need." Sarah appeared behind him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. "I'll prepare the guest room," she said, her knowing smile suggesting she'd half expected Jessica's return. That night, Jessica slept more soundly than she had in years. The weight of corporate expectations lifted from her shoulders. She woke to sunlight and the distant sound of children's laughter, momentarily disoriented before, remembering where she was and why. The guest room in Thomas and Sarah's home was simple but comfortable, decorated with hand-woven textiles and local artwork. On the dresser sat a small vase of wildflowers, a welcoming touch that brought unexpected tears to Jessica's eyes. After dressing in jeans and a sweater, clothing she rarely wore in her former life, Jessica made her way to the kitchen where Sarah was preparing breakfast. "Good morning," the elder woman greeted her. "Thomas has called a council meeting for this afternoon. Several people would like to hear what you know about Montgomery's plans." Jessica nodded, accepting a cup of coffee. "I'll tell them everything I can. Though I suspect Richard will change tactics now that I've defected." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "Defected, such a serious word for following your heart." "Is that what I've done?" Jessica asked half to herself. "Isn't it?" Before Jessica could respond, the front door burst open and Lily bounded in, her energy filling the room instantly. "You came back?" the girl exclaimed, throwing her arms around Jessica's waist in an exuberant hug. "I knew you would." Jessica found herself laughing as she returned the embrace. "Did you now? You're very wise for 11. "Grandfather says I have an old soul," Lily stated matter-of-factly. "Is it true you quit your job with the bad man who wants to destroy our home?" "Lily," Sarah chided gently. "Mr. Montgomery isn't bad. He's lost his way." Jessica appreciated the correction. Despite everything, she didn't believe Richard was evil, just disconnected from the consequences of his actions, insulated by wealth and power from the realities experienced by communities like Eagle Creek. The morning passed quickly as news of Jessica's return spread through the community. Visitors stopped by Thomas's home to welcome her back, some bringing small gifts, homemade bread, a handcrafted journal, a potted plant for her window. The genuine warmth of their welcome was overwhelming after years in the competitive, often cutthroat corporate world. By afternoon, the community center was packed for the council meeting. Jessica stood before people who had been strangers just days ago, but now looked at her with cautious hope. "I want to be clear about something," she began. "My leaving Montgomery Resorts won't stop the Eagle Crest project. Richard Montgomery has invested too much to walk away, and he has virtually unlimited resources at his disposal." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Thomas gestured for silence. "We're not asking you to solve our problems, Jessica. We're asking for your insight." Jessica nodded and continued. "Richard has called in Calvin Mercer, head of crisis management. Calvin specializes in neutralizing opposition to Montgomery developments. His tactics are effective." For the next hour, Jessica detailed everything she knew about Montgomery's standard approach to community resistance: the legal pressure, the divisive tactics designed to split unified opposition, the targeted financial incentives to key influencers, the media campaigns that reframed protesters as anti-progress or unreasonable. "Calvin will identify your most vulnerable points and exploit them," she explained. "He'll look for internal divisions, financial weaknesses, legal gray areas. He'll try to turn community members against each other with individualized offers." Michael Running Bear leaned forward. "So how do we counter this?" Jessica took a deep breath. "By doing exactly what you've been doing, staying unified, maintaining a clear message about cultural preservation and environmental protection, but also by being smarter about how you fight." She outlined strategies for the community to consider: legal approaches that might delay development, media campaigns to build broader support, potential allies among environmental organizations, and indigenous rights groups. Most importantly, Jessica concluded, you need to change the narrative. Right now, Richard sees this as a simple business obstacle, local resistance to be overcome. He needs to understand that Eagle Creek isn't just another development site. It's a living community with a unique cultural heritage and sustainable practices that deserve preservation. After the meeting, Thomas, Sarah, Michael, and several other community leaders gathered with Jessica to discuss next steps. The conversation was serious but hopeful, focusing on practical actions rather than despair. "We should contact Amanda Eagle," Michael suggested, referring to Thomas's daughter in Seattle. "With Jessica's insights, she'll have more ammunition for the legal challenge." Thomas nodded in agreement. "I'll call her tonight." As they continued strategizing, Jessica's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Excusing herself, she stepped outside to answer. Jessica Parker. Her professional tone emerged automatically. "Jessica." The voice was instantly familiar. Calvin Mercer, Richard's crisis manager. "I just got to Bozeman. Richard told me you've gone rogue." Jessica steeled herself. "I resigned, Calvin. I'm no longer with Montgomery Resorts." "So I heard." His tone was casual, almost friendly. "Look, we've worked together for years. I respect you. So I'm calling with some friendly advice. Don't throw away your career over this." "I appreciate the concern," Jessica replied coolly. "But my decision is made." Calvin sighed. "These people are using you, Jessica. They see you as a weapon against Richard, nothing more. Once this is over, where will you be? No job, no references, no future in corporate development. Is that really worth it for some trees and a handful of activists?" The question was designed to plant doubt, and Jessica felt its sting. But looking back through the community center window, seeing the determined faces of people working together to save their home, she found her resolve strengthening. "Goodbye, Calvin. Good luck with the project." She ended the call before he could respond. Inside, the planning continued. By evening, they had outlined a comprehensive strategy combining legal challenges, media outreach, and direct action. Jessica contributed her organizational skills and corporate knowledge, feeling more energized than she had in years. That night, as she sat on the porch of Thomas's home, watching the stars emerge, Jacob Whitebear joined her. He lowered himself carefully into the adjacent chair, his movements betraying his age despite his still strong presence. "Thomas told me you've joined our cause," he said, after a comfortable silence. "Richard must be furious." Jessica smiled ruefully. "Furious doesn't begin to cover it. I was his protege. He expected absolute loyalty." Jacob nodded. his weathered face thoughtful in the fading light. I remember when Richard valued other things above loyalty, integrity, vision, purpose. The photograph you gave me, he recognized it, Jessica said. For a moment I thought I saw something, regret maybe, but it didn't last. The young man in that photo still exists somewhere inside him, Jacob said quietly. Buried deep, perhaps under years of profit margins and shareholder value, but still there. Jessica wanted to believe that, but found it difficult after witnessing Richard's cold dismissal of everything Eagle Creek represented. Even if that's true, it doesn't help us now. Richard is fully committed to this resort. Jacob reached into his pocket and withdrew a small smooth stone, turning it over in his palm. When I worked with Richard, he carried this everywhere. Said it reminded him of why he started Montgomery Lodges, to help people experience the natural world without destroying it. He handed the stone to Jessica. It was nothing special, just a river rock worn smooth by water over countless years. Yet, holding it, she could imagine the younger Richard drawing some kind of strength or perspective from its simple solidity. He left it behind the last time he visited Eagle Creek, Jacob continued. 15 years ago. I've kept it, thinking someday he might remember what it meant to him. Jessica closed her fingers around the stone. You think there's still a chance he could change his mind about the resort? Jacob's expression was both sad and hopeful. I think every man deserves the opportunity to remember his better self. The next morning brought news that shifted the dynamic dramatically. Amanda Eagle, Thomas's daughter and an environmental attorney, arrived from Seattle with a legal team. Jessica was introduced to her at the community center, a formidable woman in her 30s whose professional demeanor reminded Jessica of herself just days earlier. We've filed for an emergency injunction, Amanda explained to the gathered community leaders, based on potential violations of the National Historic Preservation Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It's a strong case, especially with the documentation you've provided about the cultural significance of specific sites within the development area. Jessica was impressed by the legal strategy, but worried it wouldn't be enough. Montgomery has an army of attorneys who specialize in overcoming these kinds of challenges. Amanda's smile was confident. So do we. My firm has partnered with the Environmental Defense Alliance. We're prepared for a fight. The day unfolded in a flurry of activity. Amanda's legal team conducted interviews with community elders about the historical and cultural significance of the land. Environmental scientists documented sensitive ecosystems that would be destroyed by the resort development. Jessica worked with Michael on a comprehensive media strategy, leveraging her corporate communications experience to craft compelling narratives about Eagle Creek. Late in the afternoon, Jessica was helping document traditional medicinal plants with Clara when her phone rang again, Richard's number this time. She hesitated before answering. Richard. This has gone far enough, Jess. His voice was tight with controlled anger. You've made your point. Whatever grievance you think you have with me or the company, this isn't the way to address it, Jessica. Moved away from Clara for privacy. This isn't about grievances, Richard. It's about doing what's right. Right? He almost spat the word. You abandon your job, violate your confidentiality agreement, and actively work against a project you were hired to facilitate, and you want to talk about what's right. I want to talk about Eagle Creek, Jessica replied calmly, about the people whose lives you're planning to upend for another luxury resort that the world doesn't need. Richard's laugh was harsh. Don't be naive. Progress always has costs. People adapt and move on. That's the way the world works. It doesn't have to be. Jessica found herself thinking of Jacob's words. You used to believe in a different kind of development, Richard, one that respected the land and the people connected to it. A long silence followed, so extended that Jessica wondered if the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had changed, softer, with an undertone she couldn't quite identify. Jacob Whitebear got to you, didn't he? Showed you that damn photograph, told you his version of ancient history. He showed me who you used to be, Jessica confirmed, before profit became your only consideration. Another pause. What exactly do you want, Jessica? The question caught her off guard. "I want you to reconsider the Eagle Crest Resort, to see what I've seen in Eagle Creek, a community worth preserving, a way of life that has value beyond any balance sheet." "And if I don't?" "Then we'll fight you," Jessica said simply. "Every step of the way. The injunction is just the beginning." Richard sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. "You know you can't win. Even with the legal delays, even with the bad publicity, eventually Montgomery Resorts will prevail. We always do." "Maybe," Jessica acknowledged, "but sometimes the fight itself changes things, Richard. Sometimes it changes people." "People like you." His tone was pointed. "People like both of us," she countered. "Come to Eagle Creek. See it for yourself before you destroy it. Talk to Jacob again. Remember why you started Montgomery Lodges in the first place." "This conversation is pointless," Richard said abruptly, his momentary openness vanishing. "I have a company to run and a development to salvage. Goodbye, Jessica." The call ended, leaving Jessica staring at her phone with a mixture of frustration and an odd sense of hope. Something in Richard's voice during that conversation had suggested conflict beneath his certainty, a hairline crack in his corporate armor. She rejoined Clara, who was carefully labeling specimens of medicinal plants. The elder woman looked up with knowing eyes. "Difficult conversations often plant seeds that bloom later," she said, somehow aware of Jessica's thoughts. "Sometimes long after we think they've fallen on barren ground." Jessica smiled, grateful for the wisdom. "I hope you're right. But in the meantime, we need to keep fighting." The next day brought the first visible sign of Montgomery's counter-strategy. A local television station ran a segment featuring interviews with Bozeman business owners, enthusiastic about the economic opportunities the Eagle Crest Resort would bring to the region. The piece portrayed Eagle Creek residents as anti-progress obstructionists, standing in the way of jobs and prosperity. "Classic Calvin," Jessica muttered as they watched the broadcast at the community center. "Reframe the narrative. Make you look like the villains." Michael nodded grimly. "How do we counter this?" "We need our own media strategy," Jessica replied. "Personal stories, faces, real people talking about what would be lost. Not just abstract concepts like cultural heritage or environmental protection, but specific individuals whose lives would be upended." With Amanda's legal team handling the injunction and formal challenges, Jessica found herself taking on the role of strategic communications director for the community. She worked with residents to develop compelling personal narratives, coordinated with sympathetic journalists, and utilized social media to share Eagle Creek's story with a wider audience. The work was exhausting but fulfilling in a way her corporate career had never been. Each night, Jessica collapsed into bed, physically tired but mentally energized, feeling the satisfaction of fighting for something that truly mattered. A week into her new role, Thomas found her working late at the community center, surrounded by notes and campaign materials. "You should rest," he said, setting a cup of tea beside her laptop. "The battle will still be here tomorrow." Jessica rubbed her eyes. "Montgomery's PR machine operates 24/7. We need to keep pace." Thomas sat across from her. "You've brought new hope to our community, Jessica, but this fight isn't solely yours to carry." She looked up at him, struck by the genuine concern in his expression. In her corporate life, mentors like Richard had pushed her to work harder, achieve more, sacrifice personal well-being for professional success. Thomas's gentle suggestion that she rest was a stark contrast to that culture. "I'm afraid of letting everyone down," she admitted. "I know how Richard operates. He'll use every resource at his disposal to win this fight." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "There's an old story my grandfather told me. A small bird noticed a forest fire beginning and, while other animals fled, it flew to the river, picked up a single drop of water in its beak, and dropped it on the flames. Over and over, it made the journey, one tiny drop at a time. The other animals laughed at its futile efforts. What difference can one small bird make against such a massive fire, they asked. The bird replied, I'm doing what I can with what I have. That is all any of us can do. Jessica smiled at the parable. And did the bird put out the fire? No, Thomas admitted, but its courage inspired the other animals to help, and together they saved the forest. He rose from his chair. Rest. Jessica, tomorrow is another day for dropping water on fires. As she packed up her materials and prepared to leave, Jessica's phone chimed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the content made her heart race. Eagle Creek, tomorrow, 10 a.m., come alone. And Richard was coming to Eagle Creek. After everything, he had decided to see it for himself. Jessica stared at the message, hope and apprehension battling within her. Was this a genuine opening, or just another tactical move in his corporate strategy? Either way, tomorrow would bring Richard Montgomery face to face with the community he planned to displace, and with the man he used to be before success changed him. Jessica could only hope that the encounter might awaken something in him that profit margins and shareholder value had long ago buried. As she walked back to her cabin under the vast Montana night sky, Jessica found herself whispering a quiet prayer to whatever forces might be listening. Let him see, please, just let him see. Dawn broke clear and crisp over Eagle Creek. Jessica had been awake for hours, too restless to sleep with Richard's impending visit weighing on her mind. She'd shown Thomas the text message last night, and they'd agreed she should meet Richard, alone initially as he requested, but with the community ready to engage if an opportunity presented itself. Standing on the porch of her cabin, Jessica watched the sun illuminate the mountains, painting them gold against the blue sky. In the weeks since she'd first arrived in Eagle Creek, autumn had begun its subtle transformation of the landscape. Touches of yellow and orange now highlighted the predominant green of the pine forest. The air carried the first hints of the coming season's chill. Jessica dressed carefully, not in her former corporate attire but in clothes that reflected her new reality. Jeans, a simple blouse, boots suitable for the mountain terrain. Around her neck, she wore the eagle pendant the community had given her, no longer hidden but displayed proudly. At 9:45, she walked to the designated meeting place, a viewpoint overlooking the valley where the Eagle Crest Resort was planned. Thomas had explained that this spot, with its panoramic vista, had been a sacred site for his people for generations. If anywhere could communicate the spirit of Eagle Creek to Richard, perhaps it was here. Jessica arrived early and stood alone, gathering her thoughts. The valley below was a masterpiece of natural design, the silver ribbon of the creek winding through forests and meadows, the mountains rising majestically in the distance, the delicate balance of ecosystems visible even to an untrained eye. At precisely 10 o'clock, she heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. Looking up, she spotted the sleek corporate chopper bearing the Montgomery Resort's logo, approaching from the direction of Bozeman. It circled once before settling in a clearing about 100 yards from where she stood. The door opened, and Richard Montgomery emerged, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored suit that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness setting. He spoke briefly to the pilot before making his way up the path toward her, his expression unreadable. Jessica stood her ground as he approached, noting the subtle signs of strain in his features, new lines around his eyes, a tightness to his mouth that hadn't been there before. The crisis was taking its toll, even on the unflappable Richard Montgomery. Jessica. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze taking in her transformed appearance. You look different. I am different, she replied simply. Thank you for coming, Richard. He glanced around at the sweeping vista. An impressive view. I can see why our architects were enthusiastic about the location. That's not why I asked you to come here, Jessica said quietly. Richard sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly. I know. You wanted me to have some kind of spiritual awakening about the value of untouched wilderness, to suddenly prioritize the cultural heritage of a few hundred people over a multi-million-dollar development. It's not going to happen, Jess. Then, why did you come? The question hung between them, forcing Richard to consider his own motivations. He turned away from her to look out over the valley. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe... He paused, seeming to search for words. Maybe I wanted to understand what could possibly make my most loyal executive suddenly abandon everything she'd worked for. Jessica moved to stand beside him. Not abandon. Choose differently. There's a difference. For several minutes they stood in silence, the morning sun warming their faces as they gazed out over the landscape. "It's beautiful," Richard finally admitted. "I'll give you that. But beauty doesn't change market realities or legal contracts. The resort will be built. Jessica, your defection hasn't changed that fundamental fact. Would anything change it?" Jessica asked directly. "Is there anything that would make you reconsider this project?" Richard turned to face her. "Why does it matter so much to you? You barely knew these people existed 3 weeks ago." "Because I've seen what would be lost," Jessica replied, her voice intense with conviction. "Not just the land, but a way of life. A community that's found a balance most of us are still searching for. And because I've seen what your resorts really do to places like this, how they transform living communities into manufactured experiences, how they replace authentic connection with curated luxury." Richard's jaw tightened. "That's an oversimplification, and you know it. Montgomery Resorts creates thousands of jobs, generates millions in tax revenue, revitalizes struggling regions." "I know the talking points, Richard," Jessica interrupted gently. "I wrote most of them, remember? But here's what they don't capture. Some things, once destroyed, can't be recreated, no matter how much money you throw at cultural preservation initiatives or environmental mitigation funds." Before Richard could respond, a figure appeared on the path behind them. Jacob Whitebear, moving with deliberate steps, his weathered face solemn in the morning light. Richard stiffened at the sight of his former mentor. "Jacob." "Hello, Rick." Jacob used the old nickname naturally, as if the decades and corporate hierarchies between them had momentarily dissolved. "It's been a long time." Jessica stepped back, giving the two men space for a reunion 15 years overdue. Richard's expression was guarded, but she caught the subtle flicker of emotion in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or memory. "You look well," Richard said stiffly. Jacob's smile was gentle. "For an old man who nearly died a decade ago, I suppose I do." He moved to stand beside them at the viewpoint. "I see you've come to look at your next conquest." Richard's posture became defensive. "This isn't personal, Jacob. It's business." "The land rights were legally acquired." "Always hiding behind legalities," Jacob interrupted, his voice not angry but sad. "The young man I taught would have asked different questions. Not, can I do this legally, but should I do this at all?" Richard's face hardened. That young man didn't understand the realities of running a global corporation, of answering to shareholders and board members, of competing in an international market. "And are you happier now?" Jacob asked simply. "With your billions and your board seats and your global brand? Are you fulfilled, Rick?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Richard off guard. He opened his mouth to deliver what Jessica expected would be a practiced response about success and achievement, but then closed it again, something uncertain flickering across his features. "My personal fulfillment isn't relevant to this discussion," he finally said. Jacob reached into his pocket and withdrew something that he held out to Richard, the river stone he had shown Jessica days earlier. "You left this behind the last time you visited Eagle Creek." Richard stared at the stone, recognition dawning in his eyes. Almost unconsciously, he reached out and took it, turning it over in his palm just as Jessica had seen him do with contract drafts and financial reports when deep in thought. "You kept this? All these years?" There was genuine surprise in his voice. Jacob nodded. "I thought someday you might want to remember why you started, before the Montgomery Empire, before the shareholders and the board, when it was just you and a vision of something different." For a moment, something vulnerable and authentic crossed Richard's face, a glimpse of the young man from the photograph. Then the corporate mask slid back into place. "Sentimentality doesn't change business realities, Jacob. I have responsibilities that go beyond personal nostalgia. As do we all," came a new voice from the path. Thomas Eagle approached, accompanied by Sarah, Lily, Michael, and several other community members Jessica had come to know over the past weeks. They formed a respectful semicircle, not confrontational but present, witnesses to this crucial moment. Richard tensed at their arrival. "I asked to meet Jessica alone." "And you did," Thomas replied calmly. "But Eagle Creek belongs to all of us. If its fate is being discussed, we have a right to be present." Before Richard could object further, Lily stepped forward, looking up at him with none of the intimidation adults often felt in his presence. "Are you the man who wants to destroy our home?" she asked directly. Richard appeared startled by the child's bluntness. "I don't want to destroy anything, I want to build something." "But you have to destroy to build your thing," Lily persisted. "Our school, my friends' houses, the healing center where Clara works, the river pools where we swim in summer, all gone so strangers can play golf." Jessica watched Richard struggling to formulate a response appropriate for a child. In their years working together, she'd rarely seen him interact with children. They simply hadn't been part of his world of boardrooms and luxury properties. "Sometimes progress requires change," he finally said, his usual confident tone wavering slightly. Is it progress if it makes things worse?" Lily challenged, with the devastating logic of childhood. "My teacher says true progress makes life better for everyone, not just rich people." Richard looked to Jessica for assistance, but she remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. Instead, Sarah Whitefeather stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Perhaps Mr. Montgomery would like to see what his progress would replace," she suggested, "before he makes his final decision." Richard checked his watch, a reflexive gesture Jessica recognized as his way of establishing control in uncomfortable situations. "I have limited time. My helicopter—" "Can wait," Jacob interrupted firmly. "You flew all this way, Rick. What's another hour to see what's really at stake?" Something in Jacob's tone, perhaps the echo of the mentor-student relationship they'd once shared, seemed to reach Richard. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded curtly. 1 hour. What followed was unlike any site visit in Montgomery Resort's history. Instead of architects pointing out optimal building locations or marketing executives enthusing about amenity possibilities, Richard was guided through Eagle Creek by the people who called it home. Clara showed him the healing center, explaining how traditional remedies developed over generations worked alongside modern medicine to serve the community. Michael demonstrated the environmental projects that maintained the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Children proudly displayed their school garden, where they learned both scientific principles and cultural traditions through hands-on agriculture. Throughout the tour, Jessica watched Richard carefully. His expressions shifted between professional interest, skepticism, and occasional moments of genuine surprise. At the community center, elders shared stories of Eagle Creek's history, of struggles overcome and traditions preserved against the pressures of a changing world. As the tour concluded, they returned to the center of the community, where tables had been set up for lunch, a gesture of hospitality that seemed to catch Richard off guard. "You've prepared a meal for me?" he asked Thomas, confusion evident in his tone. "Despite everything?" "In our tradition, sharing food is how we recognize our common humanity," Thomas explained, "even with those we may disagree with." During the meal, Jessica observed Richard engaging in actual conversation with community members, not the superficial pleasantries he typically offered at corporate functions, but real exchanges. He asked questions about the solar power system, discussed water conservation with Michael, even smiled at one of Lily's forthright observations. After lunch, as the hour he'd allotted stretched toward 2, Jacob suggested they walk to a special place, just Richard, Jessica, and himself. They followed a narrow trail that led to a small clearing where a simple wooden structure stood, a traditional sweat lodge used for purification ceremonies. "This is where I came after my heart attack," Jacob explained, "to heal not just my body but my spirit, to remember what truly matters before returning to the world." Richard regarded the humble structure with an unreadable expression. "And what did you conclude matters, Jacob?" "Connection," the elder man replied without hesitation. "To the land, to community, to purpose beyond profit. The same things you once valued, before Montgomery Lodges became Montgomery Resorts." Richard's jaw tightened. "The world changed. I adapted." "Did you adapt or did you surrender?" Jacob challenged gently. "The Rick Montgomery I knew wanted to create something meaningful, not just profitable. He understood that success could be measured in more than dollar signs." Richard turned away, his discomfort evident. That idealistic young man didn't understand the realities of the business world. Or perhaps, Jessica suggested quietly, he understood something more important that the businessman forgot. Richard looked at her sharply, but before he could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. "I need to take this. It's Calvin." He stepped away to take the call, his voice carrying faintly to where Jessica and Jacob waited. From his tense posture and clipped responses, it was clear the news wasn't good. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "The injunction has been upheld. Construction is delayed indefinitely pending a full environmental and cultural impact review." Jessica felt a surge of hope. "That gives us time to find an alternative solution." "Alternative solution?" Richard's voice held a hint of his old sarcasm. "Like what? Abandon a $100 million investment? My board would have me removed as CEO before the end of the day. What if there was a way to preserve Eagle Creek while still creating something valuable?" Jessica asked, an idea taking shape as she spoke. "Not the resort as originally planned, but something different. Something that honors both business realities and this community's right to exist." Richard looked skeptical, but he didn't immediately dismiss her suggestion. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A partnership," Jessica said. "A truly sustainable development that works with the community rather than displacing it. Smaller footprint, shared ownership, emphasis on cultural experiences and environmental education rather than just luxury amenities." "Eco-tourism with integrity," Jacob added, understanding immediately. "Visitors come not to escape the real world in artificial luxury, but to experience something authentic, to learn from this community, to connect with this specific place." Richard shook his head. "It sounds wonderful in theory, but the numbers wouldn't work. The profit margins would be different," Jessica acknowledged. "But so would the costs, and the brand value of creating something genuinely pioneering in sustainable development. That's marketing you can't buy, Richard." She, too, could see him calculating, the businessman in him automatically running the numbers, considering angles. "The board would never approve such a radical departure from our established model." "Maybe not," Jessica conceded. "But you're still the majority shareholder, aren't you? Your personal fortune is separate from the corporation's assets. What if you backed this personally? Created a new venture, distinct from Montgomery Resorts but leveraging your expertise?" Richard stared at her, clearly caught off guard by the suggestion. "So you want me to risk my personal fortune on an experimental project in the middle of nowhere?" "I want you to remember why you started," Jessica said quietly. "To reconnect with the purpose that drove you before quarterly reports and shareholder expectations buried it." Richard fell silent, turning Jacob's Riverstone over and over in his hand, a habit from long ago resurfacing in this moment of decision. Jessica held her breath, knowing they had reached the crucial turning point. Finally, Richard looked up, his expression transforming into something Jessica had never seen before, a vulnerability that made him suddenly appear both younger and older simultaneously. "I'd need help," he said, his voice barely above, a whisper. "Someone who understands both worlds, the corporate reality and this." He gestured around them, encompassing Eagle Creek, the mountains, the community. "Someone I can trust." Jessica felt the weight of the moment. "What are you saying, Richard?" His eyes met hers directly. "My fortune is yours if you'll help me save myself, Jessica. Not just my money, my legacy. Help me build something that matters, something that might redeem the damage I've done. Be my partner in this, not just my employee." The offer hung. Between them, unexpected, sincere, transformative. Jessica glanced at Jacob, who nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Partners, Jessica agreed, extending her hand. Equal partners in creating something new. Richard took her hand, the corporate mask fully dropping away to reveal the man beneath, uncertain but determined, humbled but hopeful. Partners. The weeks that followed were among the most challenging and rewarding of Jessica's life. Richard returned to New York to begin the complex process of restructuring his personal and corporate obligations. The board of Montgomery Resorts reacted exactly as predicted, with outrage, threats of legal action, and attempts to have Richard declared mentally unfit for leadership. But Richard Montgomery hadn't built a business empire by backing down from fights. With Jessica's strategic guidance and his own considerable resources, he weathered the corporate storm. He stepped down as CEO of Montgomery Resorts, but retained his significant ownership stake, using it to influence a more moderate approach to future developments. Meanwhile, Jessica remained in Eagle Creek, working with the community to develop a collaborative vision for what they began calling the Eagle Creek Partnership, a revolutionary approach to sustainable tourism that would preserve the community's autonomy while creating economic opportunities. Thomas and the council insisted that any agreement include binding protections for the land, cultural heritage, and community governance. Richard, to Jessica's pleasant surprise, not only accepted these terms, but expanded upon them, adding provisions for profit sharing, educational initiatives, and environmental conservation. 6 months after that fateful meeting at the Viewpoint, Richard and Jessica stood together in the community center, presenting the finalized partnership agreement to the assembled residents of Eagle Creek. The plan they outlined was ambitious, but grounded. A limited number of visitor accommodations integrated sensitively into the landscape, educational, programs centered on traditional knowledge and environmental stewardship, a research center focused on sustainable practices. Most importantly, the Eagle Creek community would retain ownership of their land and homes. The development would happen around them, not over them, with community members involved at every level of planning and operation. This isn't charity, Richard emphasized as he concluded the presentation. It's a new model of development, one that recognizes the value of what already exists rather than imposing something foreign. I believe it will succeed not despite its constraints, but because of them, because authenticity is the true luxury that can't be manufactured. The community's approval wasn't unanimous or immediate. Questions were raised, concerns expressed, details debated. But the foundation of trust had been established, and over the following days a consensus emerged. The Eagle Creek Partnership would move forward. On the evening after the agreement was formally signed, Jessica found herself once again at the Viewpoint where she had met Richard months earlier. The valley below now represented not a battleground between corporate interests and community rights, but a testing ground for a new possibility, development that honored both progress and preservation. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Richard approaching, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt that echoed his younger self from Jacob's photograph. "Contemplating our future empire?" he asked, with a self-deprecating smile as he joined her at the railing. Jessica laughed. "Hardly an empire, more like an experiment. The most meaningful one of my life," Richard admitted, gazing out at the landscape now painted in sunset hues. "I've been thinking about what Jacob said that day, about measuring success differently. I've spent decades chasing growth for its own sake, building bigger and more luxurious properties, watching profit, margins and stock prices as if they were the only metrics that mattered. And now?" Jessica prompted gently. Richard turned to face her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen during their corporate days. "Now I find myself wondering what success might look like if measured in generations rather than quarters, in relationships rather than transactions, in purpose rather than profit." "That sounds suspiciously like wisdom, Richard Montgomery," Jessica teased. His laugh was genuine. "Don't tell the business press, they'd never believe it." He grew serious again. I meant what I said, you know, about my fortune being yours. I've had the papers drawn up. The Eagle Creek Foundation will be funded with 50% of my personal assets, with you as the primary trustee. Jessica stared at him, momentarily speechless. Richard, that's billions. I can't possibly. You can? He interrupted firmly. And you will, because I trust you to use it wisely to balance the practical and the visionary in ways I'm still learning to do. He reached into his pocket and withdrew Jacob's river stone, pressing it into her palm. Consider this the symbolic passing of the torch. As the sun set over Eagle Creek, Jessica closed her fingers around the smooth stone, feeling its weight and solidity, a tangible connection to the earth beneath them and to the journey that had brought them to this unexpected place. In the valley below, lights began to appear in the windows of Eagle Creek homes, not the artificial brilliance of a luxury resort, but the warm glow of a living community preparing for night. A community that would continue, would evolve on its own terms, would share its wisdom with the world without being consumed by it. I never expected this outcome when I sent you here 3 months ago, Richard said softly. Jessica smiled. Neither. Did I, but some journeys change us in ways we can't anticipate. Indeed they do, Richard agreed. Indeed they do. Together they stood in companionable silence as darkness settled over the mountains, stars emerging in the vast Montana sky, witnesses to a transformation that had saved not just a community, but perhaps also 2 souls who had found their way back to what truly mattered. In the distance, a lone eagle soared on thermals, free and purposeful in its flight, a fitting symbol for the new partnership born from conflict, the authentic connection rediscovered amid corporate calculations, and the recognition that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we preserve. The end. Dear listeners, we hope you've been moved by Richard and Jessica's journey of transformation and redemption. This story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in purpose, connection, and the courage to choose a different path when we recognize we've lost our way. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the complexity of life, love, and personal growth. Find it by clicking the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to support more original content like this. We bring unique stories that touch the heart every day, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. What would you have done in Jessica's position? What transformation in your own life has led to unexpected blessings? Share your reflections with our community of listeners. We can't wait to read your comments and connect with you through the power of storytelling.